Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. This is a session on building trust in uncertain times. My name is Mark Harrison. I work for Barclays Eagle Labs, and we're joined today by Jacob Whitish, live from San Francisco. So, Jacob, welcome. Just before I hand over to Jacob, just a quick bit I just want to talk you through. Obviously, we've asked Jacob to talk to us today, to talk us through a couple of tips and tricks on building trust in uncertain times. Just do remember that's like an overview of options you to think about. So do your own independent research as well. So obviously they're not specific recommendations or advice. Just remember all businesses have their own individual circumstances. So any statement or view that Jacob or I express may not necessarily be applicable or suitable for your business. On that note, Jacob, if I'd just hand over to you, please, just to talk a little bit about yourself, about what you do, and perhaps a bit about your background, and then into your presentation, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think I'm actually going to switch up the order just a little bit. I'm going to start off and then come back to why I'm the person to actually be talking about this. But for everyone else who's tuning in, thank you so much. Welcome to the webinar. I'm going to show you hopefully a few different secrets for how to rapidly build trust with your audiences without spending years to do so. And even if you don't consider yourself a natural marketer. I'm guessing for most people here that this isn't your first webinar and probably isn't even your first attempt to figure out how to build a trusting and responsive audience. So if you've been concerned in the past that you just can't figure it out, or you're concerned that the current market forces make it an impossible task, I'm hoping to put those concerns to rest. You can absolutely do this. And over the next half hour or so, I'm going to help you figure it out. So probably a bit cheeky of an anecdote for a fairly UK heavy audience, but there isn't a school kid in the US who hasn't heard the words of Henry Longfellow, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." One of the most iconic pieces of American Revolutionary history, Paul Revere is known for his historic ride to Lexington and Concord to warn the colonists of the impending British attack. He was successful in rousing the villagers in every town that he came across between Boston and Concord, Massachusetts, ultimately setting in motion the events that the next day would begin the American Revolution. So normally I would stop here and ask if anyone who knows this knows who this is, and usually I'd get a resounding wall of silence because nobody has any clue. What most people don't know is that there was actually a second writer on that famous night. This fellow here, William Dodds. William was a tanner in Boston and a friend of Revere. While Revere went riding off in one direction to stir up a militia, Dodds rode in the other to do the same. Ultimately, they would both end up in Concord, but only Revere would actually go down in history for the militia that he was able to rouse on his journey. Why was that? So Revere was an active networker in his town. He started several organizations. He was a small business owner and very active in his church community. He was well known and well trusted. Ultimately, this is what led to him having access to the Old North Church where he hung the lanterns, and why he was so effective at rousing the militia during his midnight ride while Dawes kind of rode off into obscurity. In this case, literally the trust that Paul Revere was able to build in his community was the difference between going down in history and fading into obscurity. So fast forward to today. As much as 85% of all job openings are awarded to someone in the poster's immediate network. Among the world's elite, a strong network is cited as one of the most valuable resources that a person can have. And there are literally millions of Instagrammable quotes on the power of your network. Now, I can hear you all right through the screen saying to yourself that this was supposed to be a presentation on rapidly building trust, not on networking. Well, stick with me here for a minute, because that's what I'm hoping to show you, is that it's really all the same. Your network, whether that's a network of friends, colleagues, or your customers and users, they all respond to the same things, and trust is the underlying currency that powers it all. So let me ask you a question. Do you have years to sit around and work on building a responsive audience like Revere? Most people think that building this kind of trust in a network, whether business, personal, or customers, takes absolutely ages. And technically, yeah, they're right. The strongest relationships will absolutely take time to build, but you can also definitely accelerate that process. So that's what we're here for. I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you 5 cognitive biases that you can use to accelerate the trust building process in your business and rapidly build up goodwill with any audience, as well as some practical examples of how you can implement these strategies into your business right now, even under the current circumstances. Sound good? So because this is pre-recorded, I'm going to assume that everybody's just saying yes and really, really excited. So to get this out of the way, who am I and why should you care? So my name is Jacob. I'm a marketing strategist who specializes in the psychology of marketing and especially around new product launches. I've worked with clients that range from industry-leading mental health apps to publicly traded beauty companies to create millions in added revenue and launch new products into international markets. Before that, I was an early employee at several different FinTech startups. I was a trustee of my college university, or my university. Founded my own marketing agency, spent the better part of a year traveling the world while running it, and then was appointed Vice Consul to the United Kingdom just to round things out because I clearly needed something more interesting already to add to my resume. These days, I live on a houseboat up in Sausalito, California, where I lead the global sales and marketing efforts for Clarity PR and occasionally invest in startups. However, today I'm just here in my role as myself as a marketer. It all sounds pretty glamorous, especially with this photo of Richard Branson up here, but it definitely wasn't always that way. And spoiler, I completely blew my shot there with Richard, so don't be too jealous. And if anyone has an in with him, I'd love to have a second chance to talk to him. Anyway, I struggled for years to figure out what I was good at, let alone how to convince my introvert self that I really did need to get out there and start building an audience. In fact, to be honest, I still really struggle with it, and especially just things like putting myself out there. I've got a few okay blog posts on my website. I've got a very modest social media following, and I've been mentioned in a few articles here and there. But for the most part, I've been fairly happy to stay out of the spotlight. And that's kind of what started leading me down an interesting path of exploring the psychology of marketing and just why we do the things that we do. So one of the first things that caught my attention when I set out to try and understand all this was an epiphany that I had while standing around at a startup networking event. You know the kind, probably looks a bit like this, a bunch of people standing around, a few discarded boxes of pizza at one end of the room, a makeshift bar that everybody is trying to run over to because they don't really know what else to do, and huddles of people circled up here and there that make you feel like they don't really want to talk to you. For the record, I absolutely hate those events. I've made it a mission of mine to try and host unique and interesting events that people actually want to go to, but that's kind of beside the point of this talk. Anyway, I was standing there with a drink in one hand, watching the scene lay out before me, and noticed one thing that would really kind of change how I would start to approach the world of marketing, which is every individual within one of those little huddles had some physical commonality with everyone else in that circle. Each group was unique from those other groupings around them. Some were all male, some were all female, some were clearly techies, others were the MBA business types. But every group had something in common that made others feel a sense of trust that this was the group that they should be in. It was kind of like on the first day of school when you try and figure out where to sit in the classroom and you quickly look around for someone that looks a bit similar to you. You may not always realize that you're doing it, but that's kind of one of the initial qualities that we're always looking for when we look around a room. Similar clothes, similar attractiveness, similar stickers on your binder. As it turns out, it's pretty true everywhere in life. And we're always going to be looking for similarities between us and an outside group to determine if we're in the right place. Any groups that we see which have a trace of that commonality will automatically be perceived in our brains as being more trustworthy than other groups simply based on that similarity. Whether it has any actual founding or not doesn't actually matter. So this is actually the first cognitive bias that I wanted to talk about, the in-group bias. So rather than seeking out people who are different from us, we tend to seek out those who we perceive as being exactly the same. Whether it's for comfort, safety, or just a lack of things to talk about, it can be seen everywhere, and it 100% can be used to build trust in marketing and advertising. So the magic of all these cognitive biases that we're going to talk about today is that they're all fairly easy to employ when given a little deliberate thought as to how to use them. The in-group bias, for example, can and should be used in all of your marketing imagery to prime your target client and customer base before they really know a lot about you. So is your target customer or user a millennial tech worker? Make sure that the images on your website either feature millennials or things that your target millennial would find interesting. If you yourself are a millennial, put images of yourself on your website. If not, but your product or service is targeted at that group, then try displaying a common interest instead. Perhaps your ideal client is a tech-savvy millennial and you're a Gen Xer. Go try on a VR headset at a store and take a photo of you wearing it. Take a casual dress photo of you working on a computer instead of this stuffy suit and tie headshot. You can get pretty creative with this. When the idea is just to try and find some sort of commonality And when a potential user first interacts with your brand, they're going to make these judgments very quickly without actually knowing very much about you, just based on what they see. So you can definitely use this for building up that very initial opportunity, or at least to get your foot in the door, to then introduce them to your brand a little more extensively later on down the line. One word of warning though, don't by any means be disingenuous. Customers value transparency and honesty above all else, and portraying yourself as kind of hip and cool when you really aren't, it's going to be found out pretty quickly as soon as somebody starts talking about you or reading up more about your brand. And that's going to cause more harm than if you'd just done nothing at all in the first place. So one company that I think has done an excellent job of using this particular bias in their marketing is the insurtech company Oscar. They know that their ideal customer is a millennial who uses their smartphone for everything. So they designed everything about this particular ad to appeal to that demographic, and anyone who isn't in that demographic is going to be turned away. I'm sure that there's probably even some people on this webinar that might be looking at this and being like, man, is he really showing that on this public webinar? It's very polarizing, and that's kind of exactly the point. They could have just as easily designed this for retirees who have a hard time leaving their homes, or busy professionals, but they knew that this is their target client base, and that this particular imagery is going to resonate with those customers. They also understood that this demographic is probably going to resonate with humor better than other kinds of messaging. So really, from beginning to end, everything about this particular ad is designed to resonate with one specific group of potential customers and introduce them to their brand in a way that's very relatable and makes them feel like they're a part of that in-group. Now, I'm actually going to start picking up the pace just a little bit, since I know I was a bit long-winded on that first one. But we've only gotten through one of the 5 biases so far. But next, one of the most commonly used techniques that most people don't even realize that they're using is called the mere exposure effect. This is where we tend to develop trust and affinity for things that we see as familiar. Basically, the more that we see something, the more we believe it to be trustworthy, even if no other new information has been added. This is the effect that most on-air advertising uses to drill messages into the consumer's minds. In this particular, or in the example of on-air advertising, the advertisers are really just trying to make a message stick through repetition, but the cognitive bias that's powering the likability and trust underlying those messages, that's the mere exposure effect. This is a great example to employ in industries where a business-client relationship disproportionately relies on trust more than other industries. So for example, the financial services industry is a great one for this particular bias, where the typical sales cycle could be anywhere up to 9, 12 plus months to really build that amount of trust before you become a customer. So there's a lot of industries that you can make very short sales cycles, or you don't really need a whole lot of trust. But with something like your financial accounts for your retirement, even things like just accounting, where a company might want to make sure that whoever they're employing is going to be very highly qualified in their particular area. The mere exposure effect is a great bias that will help people to just start to feel more and more trust towards a brand, and eventually become open to the idea of becoming a customer. So you can compress sales cycles from 9 to 12 months all the way down to 6 months or less, just through this kind of repetition, especially when stacked up with other strategies. A great practical strategy of how you can actually use this is to author several pieces of educational content that will position your company as an authority in your fields, and then use various other channels such as LinkedIn and Facebook to actually distribute that content to the same audience many different times. So building something like a retargeting audience of anybody who has seen a particular ad of yours, and then sending them different pieces of content on different channels. So maybe they see one article from you on Facebook and then another one on LinkedIn, and then you come up in Google search results from Google paid ads. This sort of strategy is going to help readers become more and more familiar with your name or brand over time, and their trust for you will begin to increase, even if they've never actually directly talked or interacted with you. So I mean, I've got some great tips for how to technically and structurally build those kinds of value add campaigns that can accelerate the process and quickly segment cold audiences down to just those that are going to be profitable. Feel free to, look me up on a different channel at a different time, and I'm happy to talk about those kinds of things. But the big idea here is just that the more you can get out in front of your potential audience in more different formats and more different channels, the more their trust for you is going to build, even if they don't know anything else. So the third bias is a particularly interesting one. It's also one that can and has been abused by bad actors. So you definitely need to be very careful to use it in a very intentional way. If you dig way back to your college sociology or psychology textbooks, you might remember the authority heuristic being discussed in relation to the Stanley Milgram experiments. In those experiments, a man in a white lab coat, told the subject to apply an electric shock to an unknown second individual in another room. For those who weren't familiar with that particular example, the subject was never actually told that this man in the lab coat was in a position of authority. They would just assume that he was because they believed and he appeared to be an authority. And in more than 50% of the experiments, simply due to that perceived authority, they complied with his orders. Those kinds of tactics are often attempted when you see things like celebrity endorsements. Unfortunately for those brands that try and use celebrity endorsements, they're usually wasting money because it's actually been shown that those actually negatively impact sales as consumers are more likely to remember the celebrity than the brand itself. Example here with this photo of me. A more effective way to use this bias is to use experts in the field who are not celebrities, but do carry weight through their credentials. Borrowing authority is an excellent shortcut to building it up yourself for a longer term play to make yourself the authority. I once built an online stock trading conference and just interviewed people who were experts at trading. I myself didn't know very much about the subject at the time, but I quickly built a following of over 1,000 people who perceived me as an expert on the subject, just because I was in proximity to those who actually were the experts and I was creating content that was useful for them. It doesn't take a massive volume of work either. Even just a handful of articles can be used to create a multi-month content schedule that will start to build your funnel. And then going back to the last bias, you can start to see how they would play in together and actually amplify each other. So as I said, this is actually not a great strategy using celebrities. So anyone who's a fan of Post Malone, you're probably going to remember Post Malone more than you will me in that particular photo. So don't do that. Instead, let's talk about the bandwagon effect. So the next bias that we're going to use, it doesn't really need any introduction. Quick refresher though, the bandwagon effect is when an individual places their trust in something based on the perception that other people have already placed the trust in it first. This one's big in quickly building trust, and fortunately for us, it's pretty easy to create through social media and social proof tools that can be employed on your websites. So you're probably already using it, or hopefully it's going to be the first thing that you implement after this. Things like social share counters, comments and posts, testimonials, reviews, recent sales software, all of that type of things can drastically increase your sales or installs by multiple hundreds of percentage points if you employ it correctly. A particular tool that I enjoy, but by no means the only one out there, is just called Proof. Not affiliated with them at all. They just allow a site to install a few lines of simple code, and a little pop-up appears in the bottom corner of your site that anytime a customer or client checks out by displaying their little face icon, location, name of the buyer, how recently they purchased. Like I said, there's tons of different tools that do that, but that's a particularly effective and a bit more recent software that helps with bandwagon effect. The ultimate social proof, they claim to have seen increases in over 300% for people who use this type of software, and there's plenty of different styles and complexities to fit your specific situation. So that's definitely one that I highly recommend anyone use, just in general, not that particular company, but just that type of software. It can be used across financial advisors, startups, e-commerce, you name it. You can probably find some way to use that type of social proof in your marketing. Finally, on this topic, just using things like testimonials, reviews, they really are some of the most powerful social influencers out there. If you don't have any customers or users yet, then go ahead and show it to some of your friends, family, get them to make a statement. It really doesn't actually matter if you know the people or not. Just having that quote on the site, it will absolutely make a difference. And then as you get more and more organic reviews and testimonials, you can start updating those onto your site. The Pratfall Effect. So this one's particularly fun. Cognitive bias is it involves being okay with imperfection. Essentially, the Pratfall Effect says that poking fun at yourself or making a mistake will actually increase your likability so long as the viewer continues to perceive you as being competent at your service. So for instance, if you're a restaurateur that's known for making amazing food, then the chef making a typo in a social media post is probably going to increase his or her likability, since that clearly has absolutely no bearing on their ability to cook great food. Or a financial advisor stumbles during a live presentation and then jokes about it. The crowd knows that this has nothing to do with their ability to manage a portfolio, so they're going to like that person, and it's going to really kind of endear them a lot more for that. I've actually already used this particular one a few times in this presentation. So if you're rewatching this in the future, see if you can spot where I intentionally did it and where it was just me completely messing up and making mistakes. It's been a little bit of both. For me personally, I really like to use it as permission to not be perfect. I'm very much a type A type individual and hate having mistakes in my webinars or marketing campaigns. But rather than driving myself crazy trying to do 50 different takes on a webinar, I just remember this and say it's okay to make fun of myself or get a bit tongue-tied here and there, as long as it doesn't lower anyone's perception of my ability to actually get the job done. It can be intentionally crafted with a little self-deprecation when introducing yourself or in your content creation. It can also be totally accidental, and then just give yourself permission to forgive yourself afterwards. Just make sure you don't go overboard. You still want to make sure that you come across as a professional rather than as a comedian, unless you are in fact a comedian, in which case, please do. Finally, one more kind of bonus tip. So that was the 5 main themes. The last thing that I wanted to mention, which is particularly relevant right now, is the power of just simple candor and honesty. Right now, the world feels like it's a bit falling apart. And on top of that, it seems that just about everyone and their mums has an opinion on what you should be doing in response. The problem is, how the heck do you know what people are actually doing and how much of this is just junk that they're repeating because it sounds good? You know, all your clients and customers, they feel the same way right now. There's so much noise that it's really hard to stand out. And sometimes just the calm and collected voice is the one that actually stands out the loudest. So right now, just a little honesty and a message from the heart goes a long way to standing out with your audience. It also comes across as a truly genuine message in a sea of hypocrisy. For me personally, one of the things that I recently did is I decided to stop trying to sell and just to see if I could actually help my audience. So just yesterday, I wrote a new email campaign that's going out to our list that it just tells people exactly what we are doing in response to the economic downturn, without any big grand speeches, no lists of items of what people should be doing. Just a simple note from the heart about what exactly we are doing, some of our best learnings, lessons, takeaways, just kind of giving away all of the best inside information that we possibly can to try and help out anybody who wants that sort of help. And you know what? People love it. So I would just say with that, we can kind of wrap things up. Hopefully I've given you some strategies based in cognitive science that helps you to actually implement new strategies in your business without spending years to try and build up that trust. And even if you don't consider yourself a natural marketer, hopefully several of these things, you'll see how they can kind of interplay with one another, can be stacked on top of one another to build some really powerful campaigns. So let me ask you a question. If you stole all of these strategies and implemented them in your business today, do you think you'd increase your success at building trusted followers? I'm betting yes. So hopefully you're as excited about all this as I am. Thank you all for joining me. Put together a few free materials that you can grab right away. Head over to jacobwhitish.com/Barclays. And you can get several bonuses that I put together just for this group, which would include a quick reference guide to rapidly building a Facebook group that you can use to amplify your marketing, a 15-page guide to communications in crisis situations, including sections on how you can communicate with your investors, your staff, and your customers. And finally, drop in a few details on how you can score either free consult with me, a Facebook swipe file of just ideas and inspiration for how to run campaigns. And if you want to stay in touch or want to keep the conversation going, feel free to connect with me via either my website or look me up on LinkedIn. And that's it. So thank you very much for coming out. I hope to hear from you all in the future, and I'll pass it back over to Mark.
Cool. Jacob, thank you for that. That was really useful, and I certainly enjoyed it. So just a really big thank you, first of all, to you, Jacob, and also to those kind of listening and tuning in today. Please just do remember, like, obviously do your own research as well. Obviously the tips and tricks today might necessarily not work for everyone, so do just bear that in mind. Really, really grateful if you could fill out the survey. So I think there's going to be a slide or a link under this video as well. So please have a click on that video. Sorry, on that link and the QR code, and let us know what you think. Also visit the Eagle Labs support hub. So if you just type that into your browser or to Google, you should find that. Just remains to thank Jacob again, and to wish you all a really good day. Thank you very much.